Welcome. Welcome to the Keystone Heights Council and Airport Workshop. We're really happy to have all of you here. I want to open the meeting. We're going to start out with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Mayor
Tom-
Rodenroth.
Mayor Rodenroth, I'm here.
Vice Mayor Hart.
Here.
Councilman Bobby Brown.
Here.
Councilman Tony Brown.
Here.
Councilwoman Thompson. Here. You have a quorum, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Ms. Burkowski. Okay, I want to open up the floor for public comment first.
I have several, Madam Mayor. First, we have Mr. David Kirkland.
Good morning, Madam Mayor and Council. My name is David Kirkland. I reside at 7266 Southeast 2nd Place, Stark, Florida. First of all, let me say, Madam Mayor, congratulations on the new job.
Thank you.
Given your extensive professional business background and the excellent leadership that you've provided already on committees here in the city, I know you're going to be a great asset to this council. During the April 3rd, 2023 council meeting, Councilman Tony Brown and Councilwoman Thompson had agenda items dealing with the Keystone Heights Airport, and more specifically, replacing the Airport Authority with a committee similar to the Heritage Committee, and what those ramifications might be. Councilman Brown, you stated this is something that was brought up to me to look into, and it's something that a previous city manager was looking into. I think we're all interested to discover who brought this up for you to look into. Was it a citizen, a tenant at the airport? And if it was a previous city manager, did he explain why no action was taken by the city council during his tenure? Has there been any research as to why no action was taken? It's my desire through today's public comments, the council discussions, and legal advice from the attorneys that we will understand the importance of maintaining the separate dependent district status of the Airport Authority. Councilwoman Thompson, thank you for your compliment that the airport is doing some great things. However, I'm a little puzzled by your comment that you thought it would be wonderful to have some oversight of the airport, when in reality, all of the council already has full oversight. For example, this council approves all of the annual audits, all of our budgets, plus any and all special funding issues, and most importantly, you appoint the Airport Authority members. On behalf of the Airport Authority, we do appreciate the council members who attend our board meetings and any other special events occurring at the airport, because your presence indicates you're interested and supportive of the airport activities. One last important point of information is the issue of the FDOT READY funding status. READY is Rural Initiative Development Initiative, Rural Economic Development Initiative funding status. At the present, the airport has a Stark address situating it in Bradford County, thereby associating it with a READY status. If governance of the airport moves to being a city, committee, or department, that changes the status. Now, how is this significant? The READY status saves the board a 5% share on FAA projects, FAA-funded projects, and 10% on FDOT-funded projects. In an average year, these wave sponsor share amounts could be as high as $200,000. We would lose that. If the city of governance moves to City Hall, if the seat of governance moves to City Hall, the FDOT may no longer identify the airport as a READY eligible.
Excuse me, David. We have to allow 3 minutes.
Yes.
So
All right.
I'm going to have to interrupt you. I appreciate it.
That's fine. And the only thing I was going to say is I did give each of you some questions that I'd like. Hopefully that in our workshop we have an opportunity to answer those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Next, I have Mr. Jim Taylor. Good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate the City Council having this workshop. I think it's very important. I'm Jim Taylor. I represent the Airport Board. I've had the pleasure of doing that for over 20 years now. And as a lawyer, of course, I look at things from a legal perspective. And there are various legal aspects to the separation of the city from the operations of the airport. One particular aspect I wanted to emphasize to the City Council, because I think it's something that should be kept in mind as the council deliberates what to do in this situation. And we have a concrete example of it in the litigation that the airport had with pipeline contractors that concluded several years ago. That was a breach of contract action, and there were two sides to that issue. The case had its foundation in a question of whether pipeline contractors had used a defective material. Pipeline contractor said it didn't. We said it did. And we were able to prevail in that lawsuit, but it took years of litigation, and it took a lot of cost, and it took a week-and-a-half trial in front of Judge Lester in Green Cove Springs. And as lawyers are supposed to do, we always look at, well, what happens if everything goes wrong, if everything doesn't go the way you expect it to? Things went the way we expected it to in that lawsuit, but if they had not, the airport would have been looking at a judgment being entered against it in favor of pipeline contractors for the amounts that we refused to pay when the defect in the materials first made themselves apparent. In addition, the city would have incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees, focusing just on the possibility of there having been a judgment against the city in that case, or against the airport as it was in that case, in favor of pipeline contractors. If the city didn't have the funds to pay that judgment, it's not a good answer to say, well, we don't have the money to pay the judgment. There is Florida Supreme Court authority for the proposition that in those circumstances, the circuit court must compel the city, through its governing body, the city council, to tax its constituents to come up with the money to pay the judgment. A very unpalatable outcome that the city never had to consider in decision-making regarding the lawsuit because of the legal separation that the city had achieved when it set up the airport board back in 1991. So that's something I think is very important here. It's been a benefit that's accrued to the city, and we have a concrete example of what might have happened if that separation was not present and the outcome had not been what we hoped it would be and expected it would be. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Next, we have Mr. Scott Fryer.
Madam Mayor, council members, and staff. Scott Fryer, 7309 Southeast 2nd Place, Stark, Florida. I also am a member of the board. What I'd like to know is, again, why here, why now? And I looked at the video several times, Mr. Brown. You said something at the very end of your statement when you talked about the airport being a matter of discussion that said somebody had said something to you. The board has always been very transparent with the city. We have no secrets. You know, we're audited. I think we've all done a very good job managing that airport. And we have piggybacked off the back of previous airport authority board members to reach this point where we're at now, which finds the airport in a better position than it's ever been. Also, one thing I'd like to ask, and I know you can't answer me right now, but at the end of all of our speaking, will this be an open forum where we can, you know, through raise of hands, we'll be able to speak, hopefully, as subjects are discussed this morning. Anyway, it just seems like the timing, maybe it's just coincidental, but we don't really know what's going on. We feel like maybe somebody has called and said things, but we feel also we have the right to address our accusers. If you're hearing something from the airport, there's always going to be tenants that are not going to be happy about certain situations. if it's somebody at the county level, if it's somebody here in town, we would like to be able to address that. But anyway, thank you for allowing us to have this workshop this morning, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Scott.
Next, I have Mr. Jeff Hawthorne.
Good morning. Jeff Hathorn, 8228 Alderman Road in Melrose, which is a Clay County address. Pardon me. I'm a long-term tenant at the airport. I have had several businesses related to aviation. I do air shows and put on air shows. I've been on the airport board at Palatka for 14 years, and I've retired off that board. We put on the largest air show fly-in in North Florida for 12 years. And my association with the Airport Advisory Board and being a member of that allowed us direct contact with the tenants and the ideas of what they did. And over that period of time, like I've seen here at this airport board, it ran very well. Today in Palatka, which I'm no longer a member of the board, as I said, I retired, they have been affected by City Hall taking over, and the airport has gone down the toilet, and you can put me on record for saying that. The tenants are upset. There's no continuity between real-time activities and the city council, and it's just a mess. I'm here. I could be anywhere in the state of Florida. I've lived here all my life. I'm a refugee from the airport in Gainesville, and this has just been wonderful. I'd like to see it stay the way it is. People like Scott, we can touch these people immediately. Any problem we have, and he and several members of the board have been just workaholics out there, working to keep what we have and make it better. I'm very strongly opposed to changing anything that's going on now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne.
Next, we have Mr. Todd Falconer.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, council members. My name is Todd Falconer. I'm the Vice President of Flight Operations for MHD Rockland at the Keystone Heights Airport, and I'm here representing the company today at 7110 Airport Road, Stark, Florida. I'm here from a business perspective. We are one of the larger tenants at the airport and probably the largest financial contributor to the airport. We have concern as a company with some of the past council meetings that we've viewed and really don't understand why you want to change something that isn't broken, and from our perspective has worked very, very well. We are on the precipice of now having a FONSI letter from the FAA spending tens of millions of dollars, and from a company standpoint, the atmosphere, I'll just say that, and over the last few months has made us step back and reconsider whether there's stability here for us to make those kind of financial decisions. We feel from day one the airport authority has been excellent to work with. They've done more than we've ever asked, and we're very comfortable with the authority and would ask you to just consider that in your decision making, that we are the ones that actually live there and generate the money. And we need stability from a business perspective before we think about whether we're going to spend, $25 million doing improvements at the airport. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Faulkner.
The last comment card that I have is Mr. Grant Hooks. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh.
Hello, Madam Mayor and council members. I'm Grant Hooks. I operate a flight school known as Distinguished Flyers out at the Keystone Heights Airport. I've been a tenant there out at the airport for about 5 years now. Also currently still serving as a Navy veteran, been in naval aviation for over 20 years now. And I would just like to say over the past 5 years, I've seen the Keystone Heights Airport improve immensely. It used to be very understaffed. I'm affectionately known as one of the chief complainers out there at the field. Years ago when I first got here, the grass was always tall and the lights never worked at night. And as a pilot, that was very concerning. They have bent over backwards. The grass is never tall and every single light works. Every toilet has been fixed and it's been great in my eyes, in my opinion. In fact, so much so that starting my business in the last 5 years, it has kept growing every year while at the Keystone Heights Airport due to the part of the staff, the board members, and everybody's willingness to work together and just be helpful. And they're super nice. And it's a wonderful atmosphere. I echo a lot of the other comments of other airports, not so much. Airports in Jacksonville under the Jacksonville Airport Authority, not good. And then Palatka, same thing. I was a tenant there for about 6 months and I couldn't get back to Keystone fast enough. The only reason I went over there is I was able to get a hangar at the time, and only until we were able to get a hangar at Keystone and we ran back as fast as we could. In dealing with that and that setup over there, just trying to resolve the prorated monies paid for the hangar that month and get them back when we left early took 6 to 8 weeks to get that check back from the city. And when I called the city, they had no idea who I was, what I was talking about. And it was not good. So in my opinion, I echo what the others say. I request that it stays the same way that it is now, and I think it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hicks.
Madam Mayor, those are all the public comment cards that I have. I will state that all of you received an email from me earlier today. Mr. Ludwig is not able to make it. I did touch base with him, and he has strongly encouraged all of you to go ahead and reach out to him if you feel necessary.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. At this time, I really like to open it up to council, to our two council members that did raise concerns, and let's have some discussion from them before we move forward. Mr. Brown?
Okay, first of all, I'm probably the only one in the council that's been around the airport for a long time, even before I came here on this council. And yes, the airport has come a long way since the 70s. And I foresee it's going to go further and better. But as a council person, I feel like we have a duty to maybe review the structure of the airport. And I understand where you guys are coming from. I've been in y'all's shoes with things that I've been involved in my life that disturbed me for the way it was going. And you have every right to stand right there, call our names out, whatever you want to do. And because I've been there. But I also have a right as a council person and as someone that is supposed to look over the city and the security of the city and everything that falls under the city, and the airport falls under the city. I do want to make a couple things clear from the last meeting. It was brought to my attention. I have a phone right here, and right now it's on vibrate. I own a business. The last meeting, someone apparently made a comment after the meeting that, who's he talking to? Well, if you want to see, it was one of my employees. So if that thing goes off and I have an employee working, I'm gonna text them. I don't do business in this city on that phone, especially when I'm in a meeting. So I want to make that clear in case that goes off. The other thing is, and I wrote this down because sometimes I forget what I'm talking about. So first of all, I like to think and make it clear that I'm grateful for what this board has done and what previous boards have done for the Keystone Heights Airport. The city airport is owned by the city of Keystone Heights. Our forefathers made that choice after World War II. The Bradford side and the Clay side. And for many years, the councils have rubber stamped a lot of things that's gone through that airport. A lot of things are good. I feel that the council needs more oversight, and having a manager on contract that is hired to answer to the city council is something today I would like to discuss, and that is why we're having this. Because as you guys are governed under the Sunshine Law, we are more covered under the Sunshine Law. We can't go like what we saw the other day in Tallahassee and stand over in the corner and discuss a bill. We have to do it right here. So I understand the upsetness of y'all wanting to know why we're wanting to do this, but there's questions, and we can't go outside and talk about it. We have to do it right here. So hopefully we can get some things in the forefront today. I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know if the council is willing to look into doing this, but I think the situation right now with the manager's position is you've got a gentleman out there doing, what, 2 jobs now? He's interim manager and he's airport.
One job.
So who's your manager?
He's, Mike Sherlock is the interim airport manager. He was the airfield manager, and Justin Crawford has been moved up to airfield manager. So Mike's doing one job,
Okay.
and he's doing good at it, doing very good.
Well, I don't doubt that one bit. I feel like when we went to the form of government that we're at right now with a city manager, this place, and I'm not saying you guys that it's chaos out there, but this council, for our employees at the time, were taking orders from every council person on here, and the employees they didn't know who to answer to. And going with the form of government we're at now with the manager, we're to leave the employees alone. We don't give any kind of directions, and if we do, we get in trouble. And that's being out there and everything. That's council. That's kind of like what I want to see discussed. The possibility of having the manager fall underneath the city council and have a contract employee, just like we have the city manager. And I'm going to, before we get through today, I would hope that we can get some guidance on how to approach that. Okay, that's all the notes I've got. The questionnaire that we've received by the chairman of the airport board is some of those, like the funding and stuff like that. I would like to know if we were to go in a different direction, how does that affect, what's the difference in having it under the city and not getting these fundings that you are talking about? Wouldn't we still be the airport, and wouldn't we still work with FAA? Another question that
Councilman Brown, with respect to that, so if people want to talk, you've got to open up your live stream. You may approach.
one other question I got that goes with that is I was here when all that lawsuit was going on at the airport and litigation and everything. it was told us just a few minutes ago that the council would have had to taken on that, responsibility of a lawsuit if we didn't win. And that would go towards the taxpayers to, regain the money and stuff. But how would that, I mean, if it was lost, how would the airport would have afforded? Wouldn't it still come on to the council? So I don't understand that.
Are you addressing that to any attorney in the room?
Well, you can address it.
The
you're on
answer is
council.
that there's no shelter from contract liability. They would be liable. There's no sovereign immunity for contracts. There is a statute that does give you some shelter from torts. In other words, what that is. But contracts are wide open, and when you sign a contract, you're waiving sovereign immunity. So the city would be on the hook for the whole amount.
Even if you had the authority?
Well,
My question was, if it was turned around and the city was in charge, if we were the authority, basically, at that time of that lawsuit, you said it would come to us as a responsibility of taking care of that. But what if you didn't win? Would it still come to the city, or would it? Since we are over the airport, am I making any sense?
You're asking if the city would still have liability in the current structure. And the answer is there's a possibility of that. We would always argue under the current structure that it was distant. But to answer Vice Mayor, our contracts include that we don't waive sovereign immunity in every one of them. Also, to answer your question, there's insurance. That's what the city would have to most likely purchase, additional insurance to cover those types of claims.
has that clause ever been tested? This is an aside, I'm sorry, but has that clause ever been tested?
I haven't had anyone try to go
I can see a
above.
public policy issue all over the place on that one. That's
So-
neither here nor there.
The only time I've seen where sovereign immunity doesn't come into play is if there's a civil rights or a 1983 action filed in federal court.
I'm going to address sovereign immunity in a little bit later when it's time.
So, David, did you have a question?
I was in response to Councilman Brown's first question about the funding issues, whether or not how that would work with the ready status. I would like to have our airport engineer, Bill Prane, come up because he deals with the FAA and FDOT constantly about these types of issues. So if that's okay with the council, he could come up and explain that and provide examples, if you'd like to hear that.
Let's let Councilman Thompson state her piece that she wants to share. It's going to be easier for us to keep up with some of the details on our minutes.
Okay.
And then let's let him come up afterwards and,
Okay.
after the council's weighed in, and then those questions can be asked,
Okay.
answered, or stated. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me? Thank you for being here today. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to see everybody. And I appreciate all the positive comments about the airport, because I really like the airport. I think it's done great things. I think it can continue to do great things. I think that I do have an issue with the juggling of the jobs, specifically the manager job. But we can discuss that, but I still think that the airport should come under the city of Keystone. It is city property. I still think that. And when we get into discussions, I do have a couple questions about the paperwork that Mr. Kirkland gave us.
Did you want to touch on those right now?
Well,
Or-
okay. The number 3, when it's suggesting a major change, have you considered the perception of instability? Now, why would you use instability? And I don't understand that. Why would it cause instability? Yes, please.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Falconer, in his comment to the council, expressed that. With the changes that have occurred in the last 3 months with board members, authority appointees, and some changes there, that shows instability. There was some question on the council about certain appointments. So I'm not going to put words in Mr. Falconer's or MHD Rockland's mouth, but that's my comment about that. We're not sure as a board with what now is being suggested of where do we go? How do we proceed? The legal questions with respect to our association as an airport authority now, with all the entities we're involved with all the contracts that we have in place through the airport authority, where does that go now that we're in this flux or this fluid situation of possibly eliminating the airport authority and replacing it with a committee? So that's the reason for my choice of words of instability.
Well, people come and go all the time. I mean, you're an elected official. We elected you to be on the board.
Well, I'm an appointed.
Appointed, I'm sorry. Used the wrong term. But yes, so I mean, I don't understand the instability part of it.
I can clarify what I mean by instability now, if you'd like me to.
Sure, I'm willing to listen to everybody.
So, again, from a business perspective and not from a city government perspective, in review of the past few meetings, what we looked at, what my leadership and I sat down and looked at was, why would you not reappoint someone that had the expertise in that particular job field, who was willing to take it? And the other thing, like Mr. Kirkland was saying, we don't really understand how this is going to work. I have seen one of you a couple of times at the airport. Mr. Brown, I see you at the airport periodically. Other than that, nobody's ever approached me to see how, your largest revenue producer at the airport feels about, what's going on at the airport, how things work at the airport. And having an independent authority gives us some safety in knowing that we can get things done when we need to get them done or put the request in. I can call the airport anytime and ask what the status of the Fonzie letter is, and Mr. Prang will usually call me back and tell me. This is just it's created some interesting questions from a business standpoint of why are you concerned when it seems to me that the mechanisms that the city has over the airport authority to have oversight exist. So I don't really understand what the difference in what you're attempting or purporting to do would change with what's already there. Maybe you're not using what's already on the books, or maybe the council in the past hasn't exercised some of the questions that you could have for the board. But it's just, we're looking at it from we have a case with Space Florida for $27 million to do airport improvements out there. But in spending that money, I have to look at what confidence do I have that we're going to be able to stay there for the next 25 years or 30 years? And do I want to be able to voice something directly to the airport authority rather than have to go through a city council meeting or a city person that it's a lot of questions for us.
Okay, thank you.
Can I say something real quick, sir?
Yes, sir.
I think the problem here is that you are getting in between two sisters that are fighting.
And that may be, sir, and I understand
Now,
that.
we're going to have our little arguments and stuff like that, but I'll guarantee you there's not a person in this room that doesn't care about the situations, the city, everything going on, and that would drop what we are doing and go help out. So
And I think
you're going to have a nice place to land those beautiful planes, a nice place to train. I'll guarantee you, you won't find a better place around. And if we can't do it, we'll find somebody that can.
Well, and I think it's maybe bad timing with us too, because since we do have the Fonzie letter, we're at that point where we need to start spending money and making decisions.
Yes, sir.
And it's a
we
significant
appreciate having
amount
you.
of money.
Those birds, they're beautiful.
Thank you.
I just, but I'm telling you, Tony and me, we're gonna fight over who gets the last biscuit in the world, but it don't mean that we don't have the people that we have contracts with and stuff at the best interest.
I understand, and I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
And I feel the same way. I mean, we have disagreements within our staff all the time. So I know it's a normal part of the process.
But we have to put ours on TV and everything.
I understand. I understand.
But just don't get us wrong.
But it's kind of a perfect storm. Now that we finally have a Fonzie letter and we're looking at how are we going to spend all this money, and then we have all these questions about why is anything broken? Nothing's broken from our perspective. And I'm a resident. We live there. We operate every day, and we can't afford, from a business perspective, to have any hiccups in what's going on. And from our perspective, there are no hiccups. Now, there may be, and I don't get to see those, and I appreciate that greatly from the airport board. But from my perspective as a tenant, it's very smooth for us. Thank you.
And we love having you out there.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Hart?
Just a couple of comments. I don't want to get too far into the weeds with sovereign immunity right now, but essentially, if you take a look at Section 38 of Article 11 of our Charter Ordinance, the City Council shall set by ordinance guidelines for the airport authority, and I think that could address Mr. Brown's concern about the Sunshine Law, whether or not the Sunshine Law applies. I don't know if it does. My opinion would be it does, but we, by ordinance, I think could bootstrap and make that part of the process. That would be a way of solving problems, specific problems, without throwing the baby out with the bath. I mean, that's sort of the conclusion I reach. But I do have some comments concerning sovereign immunity if you want to get in the weeds, and I've got some citations for the record. But basically, my conclusion is that we would be taking on a whole big kettle of fish from a liability standpoint if we took on the oversight of the airport, direct oversight. There are all sorts of legal theories, and I don't know if you guys practice. I think you do some personal injury work, so you know that a plaintiff's attorney can get real creative at times and can come up with some reason why somebody has committed gross negligence and therefore punitive damages, which could make a city council person personally liable. So if that would happen, if we were to overtake or undertake the management of the airport, you may be discouraging people from running for office. You may be encouraging people for quitting. So I think the best approach here is to nibble at the specific issues and do it by rulemaking, by ordinance, rather than throwing the baby out with the bath. Do you want me to address the sovereign immunity at all at this point? Or would you rather save that? That's not the item under discussion right now.
What does council feel about that? Do you feel like that needs to be addressed before we move on? Sovereign immunity?
Before you do, I would like to address, though, while you're on the subject of Ms. Thompson and Mr. Brown, if I may.
Sure, Scott, come on up.
We have had some rather uncomfortable, heated discussions in the last 3 city council meetings. There's no doubt about that. At the end of the day, we should keep our personalities separated. I mean, if we can see level and clear. And it does get frustrating. We're humans and we have emotion. Mr. Brown, you stated that under the Sunshine Law, y'all are different than us.
No, I didn't.
Yes, sir, you did. You said we as a council can't meet, and you said we have to follow that Sunshine Law more than y'all do. I heard it.
Okay, well,
You can
I'll
look back.
clarify. You
Okay.
guys are governed under the Sunshine Law, just like this
Just as
council.
much as you are, so I just wanted to
So-
clarify that if I may.
Okay.
We have to be very careful too. We're under the same rules, just as if we were elected officials.
The other thing is, okay, so let's go with your scenario. You'd like to have the airport manager reporting to you. Okay, I can.
As a contract, just like our city manager is a contract, we enter into a contract with an airport manager.
Okay. So,
Pardon me? No, it would come under your budget. It would come out of your budget. You've had a manager, you've got a budget, and it would come out of your budget.
okay. So at this point, though, regarding that, the airport authority hires and fires people. Actually, we don't fire people. The airport manager would do that under the current way we're at. So has there ever been a time, and I want to ask you, because you have been on the council as long or longer than anybody else, I think Steve's probably the next closest. And I should say Mr. Hart, excuse me.
Steve's all right.
Okay. Has there ever been a problem at the airport in which you wanted to engage Mr. Kirkland or Mr. Thomas or Mr. Canaday when they were the chairs of the board? I mean, I'm just asking. Or have you?
You mean if there was a problem?
Yeah, if you saw a
There
problem.
was some issues at one time under Chairman Kennedy,
Okay,
and it was with a tenant.
okay.
And I believe Mr. Kirkland came on the board when some of that stuff was going on. And it was with a tenant. That tenant is no longer at the airport. But yes, there was issues, and yes, and me and him could talk.
You
It's
did
my
talk.
My understanding, I could talk to a board member. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because I don't vote at your board
Right,
meetings, and you
right.
don't vote here. So that's my understanding.
But you
of
were
Sunshine.
able to talk with Mr. Kennedy?
Yes.
Okay. So you already have that opportunity now. If there's a problem, you can call Mr. Kirkland, correct?
I could call either one of you.
Correct. Okay. So I don't know how this would change it.
Can I just jump right in?
yes,
I
sir.
see David two, 3 times a week at the gym, and we talk about business and about weather and all sorts of stuff, but we had a little discussion a couple, 3 weeks ago where I had made a casual, as an attorney, representation or idea that perhaps the board may want to have an attorney present to talk about sunshine law, or at least having it, because it's a very complex issue of the law.
Right.
And anything that is done outside of the sunshine is void, can be set aside, and that could cost the airport and ultimately the city a lot of money. So I just think it's good practice, like we have Rich here, maybe to consider doing that.
Correct.
So we've had informal exchanges like that.
Well, and that's what I wanted to make sure of, is that you know, right now, currently, at any time, you can talk to the chairman. The city council can address the chairman. And I don't know what would change, other than if this person reported to y'all, you could control leases, negotiations, and that sort of thing. That would be true. But the airport would be one department. Don't you have code enforcement? You've got streets and parks. I don't know what all the departments the city has. But at this point, the airport just becomes just another department. Right now, with the authority over it, we're focused on just the airport. That's all we do. We don't have to worry about the dog catcher or the negotiating with the sheriff's office. And the other thing, when you talk about the jobs, you're not comfortable with the jobs being jumbled around. I don't know what that means exactly. But when Mr. Cornegay left, did the city council not make Ms. Rutowski the interim city manager until you fill that void? Well, what's different than what we're doing?
My concern lies that you're moving, when I went to in past discussions, we
Right.
talked about, I've been to your meetings at the airport, I listened to you, the board discuss, the manager of the airport, and how instrumental they were.
Did
in
an
keeping
outstanding
that-
job, yeah.
Yes, a very important job and instrumental, and not only meeting and greeting new people at the airport, but helping them out in many ways.
So what is your concern?
My concern is that you're bringing, is Maria gone now?
She is, but she's still working in the background to help us processing some of the grants we have currently going on projects.
Okay, so she's not physically at the airport.
And she is no longer the airport manager. She is now an employee reporting to the airport manager
Okay.
and the board.
Okay. The new person, the interim,
Right.
you said they're doing a good job?
They are, under the circumstances. I mean, it's a lot to take on, you know. But I don't understand what you're saying with jobs. Jobs get jumbled around every corporation in America. It happens here at City Hall. It happens
I
everywhere.
absolutely understand that.
So, but again, I still haven't heard your concern. Are you concerned that the person that we've appointed temporarily to do this
Right.
may not do as good a job, or may run people off, or we could have,
Well, are you
Hostile.
still looking for a new airport
we
manager?
haven't posted it yet for the primary reason of what you're discussing. We want to search long and hard. We want to make sure we get a fit. And this is where it comes back in to play with Mr. Falconer. He's been negotiating with this airport for the last 5 years on multiple deals. We're all gone. Now he's got to meet all these new faces. I mean, it's just business sense. It's nothing personal. You get that,
I
right?
really feel, honestly, I'm going to be very honest with everybody in here. I really feel this is a personal thing. And the only reason I feel that way is because that others have brought up the past vote that we did. And I really feel like that has a lot to do with all this. And it's not personal for me at all. Nothing. I mean, I don't know everybody here.
No, I don't take it personally that you're considering this. I don't know where you got that idea.
Well, from things that were stated just earlier here,
Well, and
questioning a
that
vote
may
that we
be.
had. So yes,
Questioning what? I'm sorry.
questioning a vote
Okay.
that we had made and how we.
Well, it did seem kind of unusual. That hadn't been how it's gone, but it's always your prerogative. He said he thought it was time for a change.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And then we came to another meeting, and because of the Sunshine Law, our constitutional right as Americans, the only venue we have to approach, and of course now since you've opened that door, I'm going to continue the conversation. We were accused of bullying the city council. I've looked back at those videos many times. There might have been some trigger words that were used that I myself think that were probably not appropriate. But what other venue did we have under the Florida State Sunshine Laws to come and approach the council as a whole and exercise our constitutional rights? And we didn't demand that you reappoint that person. Did anybody hear us say that we demand it? We asked you to reconsider. If that's bullying, nobody should ever come to a city council meeting again.
Can I ask for a clarification from our attorney? If you were to approach one council person, one-on-one, would that be a violation of the Sunshine Law? I don't think so.
No.
It's not. So you could. And that's the kind of interaction David and I have had. We're not violating the Sunshine.
Right, right. And I don't mean to imply that. I shouldn't have got off on that. And Mr. Brown, I apologize,
good- it's
but
good.
it's just the way you put it. I just wanted to clarify, we're under the fall, we fall under the same rules as you. But again, I get back to, and for instance, Ms. Ratowski had asked me, you know, if y'all could come out, take y'all individually. I can't take you as a group even on a tour of the airport. Even if y'all don't talk, I can't have y'all there as a group. I have to take you, and I have to take you and you.
Yeah, that's what.
Well, that's what I was
Well,
told.
that's what we're doing right now.
It's our discussion
can.
amongst
Actually, there-
ourselves that violates.
There are group tours that happen in every local government.
Okay, well, I was just going by what Ms. Ratowski, she said she'd just line up appointments for each. But anyway,
For clarification on that, I've got counsel who was interested and wanted to know information on the mechanics of the airport. And so for them to have frequent dialogue and questions.
if they
on
ask
that,
questions,
then it
that's
would
where it
be-
gets a little
yeah,
muddy or
it would be an
cloudy.
advertised meeting and tours, and we are capable of doing advertised tours. It's a little bit more cumbersome because the public has to be able to be a part of that and witness it. So I don't know that we have the capability of that. That's why the one-on-one was
Right.
But if
suggested.
it's
And I think you were trying to play it safe, to be sure we
To make
recovered,
sure
and
that
I
they
get
could have very
that. I
candid
get that.
conversations with you.
I
It
get
is
that.
possible. Is it probable in our situation? I don't know. And I think
Right.
that for the safety of all of us, the one-on-one would be.
Well,
the
again,
option.
and y'all operate with transparency, and we do too. But getting back to you say, you feel like it's retaliatory, how do you, No, you just said a few moments ago, you said you felt like this is all stemming back to that
No, I
lack
just
of
said
appointment.
It feels like it's a personal thing from the.
Oh, you're right,
from-
personal.
I didn't say retaliatory. I would not use that
No,
word.
I'm sorry, I stand
But
corrected.
what I am hearing is just going back to something that was in the past. And I'm just giving you my perception. It is not a person, it's not personal for me.
Well-
But I feel like there's a lot of personal coming from y'all.
Well, and again, you could say that from either side. We feel like, well, what's triggered this airport thing? Was it that? Was it because we came up and asked for a reconsideration? I'm not saying that's why it is. Maybe it just got y'all to thinking. But I think that question looms on our side, and that's why it's good to have this workshop and air this thing out and talk. But the main thing I want to get back to, and this is what I was asking Mr. Brown, is there at any point, and before Mr. Kirkland got to be our chair, who I think has done an outstanding job, I never once at any of these city council meetings saw a report from the airport board in a city meeting. This gentleman right here started that. He comes to you every month and tells you everything that's going on. And y'all don't feel like you have control of it. So I guess it's piqued my curiosity. What control is it that you want? Do you want somebody that answers to you and you can control the conversation going on out at the airport? Maybe that's what it is, and that's your right, It just doesn't make sense to any of us. And but I don't think it's a true statement that you don't already have control of the airport. I think all those opportunities exist. When y'all came to our meetings, I believe it was you, Mr. Brown, and Mayor Lake. She was there. Y'all were there. You heard the meeting. Another thing that we did for years, and I think Ms. Rutowski's just been busy here lately with a lot of things going on, these upcoming events. I think y'all just had the motor surf this weekend. But she has always attended. Prior city managers have attended those. What more could you need, I mean, we're already there.
By ordinance, we can hire you, we can fire you, we can.
Exactly. You can let any of us go at any time. You can tell me right after this meeting, we're taking you off the board. You already have control. That's why I guess we're just puzzled. So, and I've taken enough time. There's other people I know want to talk, but I just wanted to clarify that. You do have the control right now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dave.
Madam Mayor, would you like to go back and we can address Councilman Brown's first question about funding? Are we to that point?
I want to make a couple of comments myself. And as you all know, I've just been sworn in a little over a week. And I was previously chair for the Heritage Commission, and then a member, of course, for the last 3 years, and worked really closely with council in kind of a similar format like what they were talking about with you all. And I can only give you my feelings on me sitting in the audience at all the monthly meetings, observing, and then seeing what happens here. And then also how we ran as far as Heritage Commission goes. Honestly, it was a really more of a relationship, partnership with council, okay? I didn't feel I was being somebody watching over me on every little thing I did. We knew we had to follow sunshine laws, things like that. And we're way smaller than what you all and the huge responsibility that you have at the airport. So I just want to put that out there, that it's a very loosely kind of a situation. What I sense is the feeling for a liaison type of role in this whole city or manager airport situation. Maybe it's more of a liaison relationship than somebody who's just hired by the city who's in there to see what's going on, right? It's still a partnership, okay? In regard to the past meetings, I was at all of them. And I was really perplexed. Personally, I've had a lot of training on critical conversations, interactions with key people, and how to really focus on the issues and ensure that personal does not get involved. I sensed a lot of personal hurt in the comments that were made by all of you, really, that stood up and spoke. And I can understand, because you love what you do, you're passionate about it, and you want to hold on to what you have and you don't understand maybe why there's some questions. But I think some folks lost their, got upset a bit. And I think coming at the group up here, they're like, wow, I can kind of understand what Chris is saying. It makes your ears go up like, well, why are they feeling like, we're like looking at them, or what are they hiding? It's kind of what it makes you feel like. And again, I was sitting right there in that chair watching this whole thing go down. So I think that's the perception more than anything. I think all of us on here respect and really appreciate everything every one of you do. I mean, David, you're just outstanding. I mean, just like Scott said, you get up and give a really great presentation every single month, very professional. But I think that kind of shocked a bunch of us a bit. You don't run Democratic and, that kind of accusatory comments. So, in my opinion, I feel like, on our part, I feel like at least one of the council members should be at your monthly meetings for presence. How do we really know what you're doing there unless we are in your world, right? And I will commit to you that I want your schedule because I will be at your meetings, okay? And I think that's the first step, but there's no formality with that. We're not required to be at one of your meetings. And I know Lynn goes, but of course she's also crazy busy a lot of times. So in fairness to you, I think we should have a presence at your meetings. And it's not just to read your agenda. I went online to see if I could see your video meetings because that's where you see what happens. But I couldn't because you have to go through Maria, and I didn't want to, I know she's transitioning and all that. But, so that I think that's the first step there, in my opinion, for us. But, I'm sure that this is going to calm down, and I hope it does. And I do believe that our intent is really to partner with you. It's nothing more than that at all. Okay? And that's just my thoughts.
Speaking of the Heritage Commission, I don't know who raised the issue or the thought that maybe the new structure, whatever it would be similar to the Heritage Commission. The Heritage Commission is only an advisory board. It has no legislative powers whatsoever. Right. And you are correct. We have a liaison. I'm the liaison.
Correct.
And I go when I think there's going to be a hot button issue or where I'm curious to see what's going on, but I don't come down to babysit. You're doing a great job right. down there. But I think having a permanent designated liaison from the city would be a great idea for the airport.
Yeah. Okay, David, you wanted to come back up?
So put on your calendar, May 2nd, Tuesday. We always meet the first Tuesday of each month, the night after you have your city council meeting, first Monday. So.
And what time is it?
6 p.m.
Okay.
And at our last meeting, we had Councilwoman Thompson. We had both Council Browns at the meeting as well. So
thank you.
We appreciate that. I appreciate your comment about the size of entities. Obviously, I think the public is beginning to realize, and I've said it many times to you, our airport is a $12 million entity. I don't know how that compares with some of the other committees that has oversight, but again, we welcome, everyone, both council and public, to come to our meetings, and we appreciate public comments that they have as well, because hey, we're not all perfect there either. So, we appreciate information we may not know about, and criticism too, that of lights, as Mr. Hooks said, he complains about. It's part of one of the projects that we have undertaken and we have funding for that's going to start in a couple of months. So there'll be new landing lights on 1129 runway. So back to Mr. Brown's first question about funding. If you would like, Madam Mayor, I can have Bill Prang, our engineer, come up and address that with some information and examples.
Okay, thank you.
Is that your pleasure?
Sure.
Good morning. I'm Bill Prang. I'm a civil engineer. I work for a company called AECom, all capital letters. AECom has about 1,100 employees in Florida. We have a whole group dedicated to just aviation consulting service like we provide for the airport board. We represent almost 50 airports in Florida. I personally manage 8 consulting contracts at Florida airports. And if I could just, I've been doing this almost 36 years. An observation from me, there's a number of ways for an airport to have governance. There's three primary ways. One is not present here. It's a board that's established by the state legislature. We don't have that animal here. The other two most common is established by a dependent board, like the board currently is, or run as a department of a municipality, a department of a city government or a county government. If I could just address the question about stability, instability, aviation and aviation management, operation, engineering, it's a highly focused skill set. And as you mentioned, people that are in that business are dedicated to the business. It's a part of them. It's more than a business, much like anybody else running a business. It's a part of them. But the aviation skill set, understanding FAA laws and guidance related to airworthiness of aircraft, how to operate a flight school, down to funding, it's a pretty narrow skill set, which is why most airports engage a consultant to help them manage that. The question about stability or instability, of my 8 clients that I represent, there's all 3 examples of typical airport governance in that. And the least stable of those airports are the municipal run. And if I could just, no accusation to the city, I'm not a local resident. I don't follow the happenings here at City Hall. But at City Hall, you have a number of things to do, whereas an airport board has one thing to do. And from the observation of tenants, like those that have spoken here, they sense when I have to work through a body that has multiple things, it's less stable in terms of consistent decision-making as opposed to working with a body that's doing one thing, an airport board. So that's just my observation. It doesn't mean that it's a bad way. It's just good, better, best would be the way I would categorize it. And in municipal government, again, you have everything that a municipal government has to be responsible for, whereas an airport board is just doing one thing. They're able to hone their skill set, their knowledge base, and focus on that. So I don't know if that adds any depth. I'm not a business at the airport, so I come from a little different perspective than the tenants do. And I don't know if you have any questions on that before I talk about the funding question.
No.
Okay. So there's 2 primary ways that a capital project is funded at an airport in Florida. There's federal funding through the FAA, and that funding is, for your type of airport, that funding is offered at 90% federal funding and 10% state and local funding. Because you currently qualify as a ready county, the 5%, the half of the 10 that you would normally pay, is borne all by the FDOT. So your projects are purely a capital project. We have one going on now. It's about a $2 million project. It's 90% federal money, 10% money from the state FDOT Aviation Office. Other than the time it costs staff to manage the construction work and manage our work, there's no capital outlay for the airport to accomplish that project. In recent years, projects of that size have been, the current one, $2 million. 3 years ago, we finished one that was about $4 million. These are your large capital projects where, frankly, any small airport in the state of Florida can't self-fund a $2 or $4 million project. Just doesn't happen. Whether they're run by a dependent board or as a municipal government. The other source of funding is from the FDOT. There are some projects that are only eligible for FDOT funding based on federal eligibility rules. A typical FDOT project would be funded, again, 90 by the DOT and 10 by the local airport. Because you qualify as a ready county, that 10% is waived. The DOT pays 100% of the project. As an example, you currently have a project at the airport. The estimated value is about $800,000. That's the runway lighting project. It's 100% FDOT funded. If you lose your ready status, you'd be on the hook for $80,000. In the other example, you'd be on the hook for about $100,000 for the $2 million project. The ready status, which might have to check this. I think ready as a state program dates back to Jeb Bush. And I can't list off the top of my head who are ready counties and who are not. I know Bradford is and Clay is not. And it was through DOT staffing decades ago that the airport achieved, most likely in the early 90s, the ready status. They were set up with a Stark address because the board operates at the airport proper. That's been reviewed once in my span of helping the airport with consulting since 2008. There were questions about that, and the ready status remained. I would just advise you, do everything you can do to protect your ready status. It's literally worth a couple $100,000 a year to the ability to do projects at the airport.
Madam Mayor, can I just ask a question on the ready status? So, full dependent special district kind of acknowledgement didn't even exist until about 13 years ago. And I guess what I'm trying to find out is who has said we would lose ready status because of where governance is, because the property's still in Bradford County.
It's actually split. It's the parts-
majority of it is in Bradford County.
Okay, and it's not my job to argue with attorneys.
No,
I think as landmass, that's true, but as operational functionality, it's about split 50-50. But that's a great question.
The case, why wouldn't we lose it now?
The address would not change, correct?
But again,
Yeah.
I guess for whatever allows the airport
Yep.
to take advantage of ready status, where the governing board is shouldn't affect that at all. So that's why I'm wondering who said that it would.
When the ready status was originally established for the airport board, and if I could just introduce another term, both funding agencies use the term sponsor. The sponsor is the entity that signs the grant document and takes on the obligations of using the money properly, completing audits, closing out the project, et cetera. So whether we're talking about FAA or FDOT, the airport board is the sponsor. And prior FDOT staff in the District 2 office made it happen so that the airport board as a sponsor would have ready status. I purposely did not ask what would happen if, because I didn't want to raise their curiosity about a change in governance. So no one has told me that they would lose the ready status, but again, in 35 years, I've seen other entities lose ready status for reasons like this. Hey, you've changed the way you operate. We're going to come in and review, make sure the new sponsor is still in good standing and has all the procedures ready to manage the money properly. And I think that we could induce a review of that unnecessarily.
And I guess I just wonder, we still have the interlocal agreements in place with Bradford, so that doesn't change.
So I have questions, and if I may, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Then the funding that comes from FAA and FDOT, I sat in a meeting with yourself and Mr. Kirkland on the priority projects for the next 5 years of FAA and FDOT. With that, then, is that sponsored by Bradford County? Because
No.
Okay, because those are all
The airport board is the sponsor.
So the airport
for
authority
all of those grants.
is the sponsor of that.
Yeah. The
Okay.
Keystone Heights Airport Authority, I believe is the official name. That is the sponsor agency for all grants that are received from the FAA and the FDOT.
And then, Mr. Commando, just for clarification, with the interlocal agreements are not between the airport authority and the
Right, between the city and the county.
in Bradford County. It's
Yeah.
between the city council. It's not even Clay County. It's the city council and Bradford County. Those interlocal agreements would not go away if council decided to move forward with however it is. If no longer an airport authority exists.
Not unless Bradford wanted to make a modification, no.
And that, I believe that interlocal agreement was focused around a single project, not around
There's
operating.
There's a couple of them.
Oh, a couple, okay. So, yeah. So I don't know, Mr. Brown, if that answered your question about why funding could change in the coming years, if the seat of governance moves. Did I answer your question?
Yes, sir, but I do have some questions.
Yep.
With the ready, is that money only used, and shame on me for not knowing this because I've been around for so darn long, but is that money only used on the Bradford County side? Or is it used as an airport in the whole and used in Clay County, even though Clay County is not a ready county?
It's used anywhere on the airport.
Anywhere on the
Yeah, the FDOT deemed
Okay.
at the time that because the operating board, the sponsor board, the airport board had a Stark address, Stark's in Bradford County, the funding is eligible for any projects on any part of the airport.
Okay, now, I thank you
Yeah.
for clarifying that.
Mhm. And I would just say, it's highly unique to have an airport that borders two counties. I can't think of another one. You know, if you were to go back and pick it, you probably wouldn't pick that arrangement because it just adds some layers of complication, but like the one you just mentioned. But they have not ever made an attempt to prorate projects, a portion of which resides in one county or the other. The airport board is the sponsor. Their address is in Stark. Bradford's a ready county. They get ready funding waivers, and the money is eligible for use anywhere on the airport.
Okay. I didn't write this one down, but I'm trying to remember. What would be and you might not be able to answer this one, but my question is, you talk about the change, but if we were to change it as to a committee instead of an authority, but we had a manager, an airport manager, even though that manager was to answer as under a contract with the city, why would that change any kind of relationship? Because if I'm sitting on here and I'm looking for a manager, just like you guys are going to be looking for a manager, I'm going to look for somebody with a lot of airport background.
May I answer as an opinion?
Yes, sir.
I think the difference there is in the context, if I understand the context of your question, the circumstance is the contracted airport manager answers to this board, not to a board that's at the airport, focused at the airport, full of aviation enthusiasts. That's the difference. Again, I don't operate on on-airport business anywhere. I don't own an airplane. I'm not a tenant at any airport, but moving around the state, advising clients and sponsors on this, the difference for tenants, advisory committees at an airport are, again, my opinion, they're a necessary evil because it becomes the only channel for a tenant to provide feedback up the structure. And tenants, airport tenants, typically view that as an encumbrance as opposed to a direct path to an airport board that's, again, typically full of aviation enthusiasts, pilots, airport business owners, etc. So that kind of relates to the stability instability question. Those on an airport who are using the airport, and by the way, could I just mention a vast number of the airport users are not based here. They're considered transient aircraft. They're moving from one part of the United States, typically to the Virgin Islands, South Florida, or somewhere else. This is a great place for them to stop. The airport has created an environment with customer service and good fuel pricing where you have regular transient tenants that come to this airport to purchase fuel, maybe have a short stopover, come to town for lunch, do a little business. They'll use the conference room at the airport, make some phone calls, and then they're back in the air. The pilot community knows what places are good, what has reliable, consistent service, and which places to avoid. And, so just to broaden the focus of who you're attracting when you're an airport operating board, you're working more than just with your local-based tenants. So I don't know if I answered the question, but when an airport manager reports to a municipal council or a commission, a county commission, it adds a layer of instability for the airport users because they know that the final board that makes decisions is not the aviation-focused people. And I really, again, my opinion, no disrespect, I'm not accusing any of you of being not aviation focused. I know you all care about the airport greatly. An airport is almost always a great community asset, and it's very true here, as in other places. It's an economic engine for you. Did that answer your questions, Mr. Commando? Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do y'all have any more questions you want to ask?
I don't have any questions, I just have a couple of comments concerning
Sure, go ahead.
the legal aspect, and we have two very capable counsel. In the room, I still have my ticket, but I don't practice, other than when something interests me. And this interests me a lot just from a research standpoint, because we've all heard the term sovereign immunity, but I didn't know what it meant exactly. And I'm not going to bore you with a whole litany of, like a professor, because I'm not. However, and this will mean more to the attorneys probably than anything else, Florida is a common law state. We basically adopted the law of England. The law of England included the concept of the king can do no wrong, sovereign immunity. At the time that Florida was formed, that only applied to the state. It has now been expanded to everything, including municipalities. Now, if we had a clear-cut statute as to what is and what isn't subject to sovereign immunity, it would be nice. The only thing we've got that I was able to find, and I'm just going to throw this number out, Section 768.28 of the Florida statutes passed in 1973, basically where whatever sovereign immunity a city had was taken away, but there was a cap of $300,000 in the aggregate. I think it was lower back when it was passed. The statute only applies to torts, doesn't apply to contracts. It only applies to ordinary negligence, not gross negligence. And as I mentioned earlier, a creative attorney can always find gross negligence. It's up to a jury to determine whether or not gross negligence exists. The reason I mention that is because the statute, interestingly, says that if an employee or someone who works for the city has been guilty of gross negligence, then the city is off the hook, but that person is personally liable. And that's why I made the remark earlier that if a creative attorney were to establish that a city employee, including a council person, was guilty of gross negligence, which in my view could include not knowing what they're doing, as far as airport operations, that person could be on the hook. That's why, one of the reasons why I am very leery of having the city having a hands-on approach to operating the airport, just from that standpoint. Common law still exists. There's a differentiation between our legislative function. If we decide to put up a stop sign, that's legislative. We can't be criticized, can't be sued. However, if we allow grass and stuff to grow over it so it can't be seen, then that becomes a business function. And there's an interesting case that kind of talks about this. It's a federal case, actually. And I'm going to throw out this site for you guys. You probably never read it. It's the Irizarry case versus Orlando Utilities, 393 F sup 3rd, 110. Very excellent review of the notion of sovereign immunity in Florida, even though it was a motion and a decision on a motion to dismiss. Basically, Orlando Utilities Commission, which was a branch of the city of Orlando, lost on the motion. And the court, in effect, found that sovereign immunity really is not going to apply when you have a business function rather than a legislative function. So if we were to undertake the management, even if it's through a manager, it's still our employee. Then, at that point, sovereign immunity, whatever we have, would go away, and all the liability, including contract liability, including some tort liability, would flow to the city. There's a old common law term called, I think it's called respondeat superior, where if your employee screws up, the boss has to answer for that screw up under an agency theory. So there are a number of reasons that, from a legal standpoint, I think we'd be picking up a hot potato if we decided to change the current structure. There's no sovereign immunity if the role is acting as a private corporation, and that's why originally sovereign immunity wasn't even given to cities. It's evolved that now it has, but if we're operating as a private corporation, in other words, running a business, then all of the bad things can flow to us as far as money damages and all sorts of things. Sort of like the church situation where the church has the exemption from tax, but if it's running a parking lot next door, it's not. We would be undertaking basically a corporation function, and policy, at least as enunciated in that case, it doesn't exist. It would be bad policy to say cities can have a complete absolution from liability just under the doctrine of, quote, sovereign immunity. If we're running a business, which this would be, like it was in Orlando, I'm afraid we would be on the hook not only for contract damages, as you've suggested, counsel, but also for tort damages. And if I said anything, counsel, that you would disagree with, please let me know. But I think that's basically where we're at, and I think we'd be opening up a real bad can of worms. That's my opinion.
Mr. Vice Mayor, I don't disagree with that. I mean, that's what my comment earlier was about, that you're not trying to avoid sovereign immunity. You would have to purchase insurance to cover those liabilities.
Yeah, but a $10 million case, somebody that's smoking a cigarette by a gas pump when they shouldn't be, I don't know if we're going to get Lloyd's of London involved. I don't know how we would cover it. Yeah, we could cover it, but what would the premium be on something like that? I don't know. That's all I have.
Smoking by the gas pump.
Well, of course, that would be gross negligence,
Yes.
which would flow to us.
Did you have a question?
Yes, my name's Rex Seymour, I'm a board member. So you're saying that as a board, we have sovereign immunity?
You would have sovereign immunity, I suppose, to an extent. That's a question I think we'd have to ask Mr. Commando. I don't know.
Well, and it depends on what the claim is. And in addition to the claim, most boards have errors and omissions policies as well as a general liability policy. Again, there's insurance that covers the decisions you make as a...
Do we have that insurance?
You have to ask your board, I don't know.
Just as a
We
general
don't control that for you.
As a general proposition, if you as a board are setting a policy or making a decision to do such and such, that's legislative and you probably would be okay. But if the person's smoking a cigarette by the gas pump and it blows up and 7 people get killed, you would probably have some...
It's a planning versus implementation analysis.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was...
There would be some criminal stuff smoking that gas also.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
I was understanding what you said, but...
Well, I was talking from the city's perspective, not from your perspective.
Right, but I had to ask...
But see, we have a wall, we now have a legal wall between the city and the airport, which shelters the city. I suppose some court could try to pierce that veil, but I don't think that's ever been tried. But we have clear, distinct liability protection right now because we are not you.
Okay, and that's why I was wondering, well, do we? I mean, or are we just hung out there?
That's why I suggested to Mr. Kirkland that perhaps you might want to have an attorney, sit in on some meetings to answer questions like that.
I thought that we were supposed to have an attorney at our
I don't know what
meetings.
your rules are. I don't know what your rules are.
I think we pay him every month to be at the meeting. Is that not correct?
That's not correct.
We don't pay him every month? No.
I think that'd be good policy, but I can't set policy for you all. That's your business.
Actually, we can.
Well, yes, we can pass a rule as an ordinance to require that. That's all I have, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I was going to ask Mr. Hawthorne or Hathorne from Melrose. He left, I guess.
I think
Okay.
he just left, yeah.
Well, I just had a question for him. He was saying that he came from Palatka, and he said it was a mess after it was deemed to be under the city council. I was just gonna ask him to explain that a little bit.
I also wonder
What
why they
mess it
didn't
would
go
make.
back to the way they were, to a setup like ours.
I'm sorry?
If it was a mess, I wonder why they didn't go back to a setup like ours.
He said the third way of structuring it
Agreed.
was the worst way, and that city of Orlando found that out when they got sued.
Mr. Hathorn had to leave. He's going out of state for a funeral,
Uh-huh.
so he agreed to be here this.
Oh, and I appreciate that, but I just wanted to hear what he constituted as a mess, and why he said it was a mess. That's all. Yes, sir.
If I may, I think I can speak to that just a little bit.
Sure.
As a tenant,
Yeah, come up to
on
the
up.
mic.
so as a tenant that was at Palatka for a little bit, like Mr. Prang and some others have mentioned, from a tenant business owner standpoint, trying to do anything, and you go to the airport manager, the liaison, the whatever the title is, it's, well, I don't know, I'll have to consult the city. Well, I don't know, I'll have to, and you don't have a direct person to speak with and get results without either waiting or chasing it down yourself. And it can be very frustrating and very cumbersome. Or having to take a pilot issue as a professional in the aviation field. Again, like it was previously mentioned, it's a very narrow skill set with a lot of rules. You have to then backfill and back explain and waste a lot of time trying to educate somebody that's not in that field. And it's not something that's common, like a park or in every city. And it's very, very, it can be very, very aggravating and time consuming and lost revenue in a sense.
Okay,
Mr. Hathorn's back, so maybe he can
thank you.
speak as
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you for that.
Would you like for him to weigh in?
Sure.
Since he-
We were talking about you.
Mr. Hawthorne?
Had to take a call from Costa Rica. Problems everywhere. I'd like to interject this one point. When the airport was taken over in Palatka by the city, and the airport manager answered to the city, the events and the things that we were doing at the airport, I've heard about the liability the city might expose themselves to. Well, it became an equal and reciprocal liability to the airport when we'd want to do something. Then, for instance, the air show. All of a sudden, we had to have insurance, and we had to pay the fire department, and it just got to be as if we were doing business as a city, and it really stopped a lot of initiatives and the communications to get things done, like we're talking about, directly to the board. That was very detrimental. And that's one of the main
So
reasons
kind
I
of
left.
kind of a perception of too much red tape, too many levers to get approved to reach a goal, is kind of what you're saying, is what I'm understanding.
Yeah.
That role kind of created a little bit of extra layers to get to a common purpose.
For instance, we'd raise, as members of the board, go to the local businesses for the event, that just specifically talking about one phase of this, the annual air show. We'd raise $20,000 from the community to put that on. And when it went under the city, all of a sudden, this is just one example, city sent us a bill for $2,500, I think it was, for the services of the fire department, because any activity like that run by the city had to have the fire department there. So I'm going like, wait a minute, we're soliciting money from the community to run this thing, and now you want us to pay you out of that donation to the city for one of your services. We didn't ever need this when it was, run without being in the city.
Because y'all have your own fire department, essentially,
No,
on
you
site?
didn't need
Or
one.
you didn't need one?
No, but yeah, the fire department, as it always
City of
was,
Palatka does
available.
have a fire department.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have our own fire department, so that wouldn't happen. I guess what I wonder.
But it
though-
was more than, there was liability, to run wires out to speakers. I mean, it just got to be ridiculous, to tell you the truth.
Got to be government work. Too many cooks spoiling the broth, is that it?
There's all chiefs, no Indians.
That's it?
Well,
Yeah, and no communication, and the rancor did start.
But you mentioned insurance, that when the city took over, now you had to have insurance liability coverage. Does that mean like when we do our air shows, we don't have insurance?
I don't run your air shows. I bring airplanes.
Okay.
There's a difference between a fly-in and a plane show and an air show. I don't want to get into the minutia, but an air show requires sequestered airspace by the FAA and TFR and so forth. And obviously, I don't want to get into educating people.
No, we're just talking about what the differences are under each model.
Yeah.
Right.
So at the recent, I thought it was air show, the big event we had recently with the airport, there's insurance in place in the event something came up, right? Okay, that's
So,
what I was trying to understand.
Yeah. And I will say, I've worked with the authority in those types of events, and they work just like a government agency does, is making sure that there's the fire rescue, there's safety out there. Those bills are getting paid, just as we do for the city of Keystone Heights when we need law enforcement at our events. I don't think that would change. And they do have insurance through FMIT, as do we. They're separate policies. Those things would be combined going under possibly combined going under a different model. We have had conversations with the FMIT insurance agent about what that may look like. There are some potential cost savings combining those, but they do have their own policy that then would not go away if a model would change, or if this model would change.
Gotcha. So it almost seems to me like, just like what Vice Mayor Hart's talking about, not having the city manager, airport manager, and then having one, it's kind of like lines get crossed and there's opportunity for double insurance, double everything in a way, to some degree.
They already have separate insurance policy. If we were to combine them, then the city, or however that would look like, that insurance would not go away. There is, according to FMIT, there is some cost savings opportunities to both entities if we were to combine it under one entity, if it were to be absorbed all by the city, as opposed to two separate policies as it is right now. But none of the coverage would go away. So there's the insurance that's in place now would still need to be in place. We do have cost breakdown from both the city side and the airport side because of baselines and things of that nature. And the more you have, the more of a break you'd get. That is a possibility, but insurance coverage either way would not be removed or would not go away because of anything, regardless if it's a separate entity as the airport authority or under the city of Keystone Heights.
The dialogue we've been having here basically shows my ignorance. I just learned a lot of stuff. But if I were responsible as a board, as part of a board, to manage, in effect, manage the manager, I would have to be very much up to speed. And if I were not up to speed, I could be grossly negligent and I could lose my house. I could lose, it could be really ugly. So that's why, from my perspective, it's just good common sense to keep the functions separate and not try to rely on one more cook to spoil the broth when the cook doesn't know how to make the broth.
Mr. Hart, I think, and Mr. Towski, that speaking of fees and insurance and so forth, my recent experience was the airport was taking on the liability of the city when the city got in it for the event, instead of the event just being covered at the airport. All of a sudden, the city's looking at it this is a liability and exposure to the city, and we need to be very careful what we do, as opposed to the airport being essentially a separate entity for liability in these events.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something about the concerns with going through the red tape and having to wait for, answers from the city council through the airport manager. If you have a good airport manager, then they should be up to speed on all the rules and regulations. And I would think, as long as there's a good line of communication open between the airport manager and the council, I would think that a lot of that red tape and those concerns would be gone.
Sounds good, but it didn't seem to work in reality.
Okay.
At least down there.
Well, and and I know, Scott, you had something to say, to tag on to what Councilwoman Thompson just said, even with the Heritage Commission, even though we were like what Steve described, a bit different, but on the functionality and process has some similarities. And it meant that when I know when I took over, I knew we had to project, we knew what was coming, what we wanted to do, but we also had to think about timeline. And if I wanted to have council consider something for us, I knew we had to plan and think ahead a bit, take a step back. Okay, if it's something for March, we need to really be talking this heavily in January. You know what I mean? Just because of time and things. Red tape, just like all of you mentioned, we could have similar situations as well, like lining up folks to do certain things for us. It wasn't something we could just say, like in 1 month, okay, we got to do this. So there's communication process, planning, proposing, really thinking ahead, which I think is what makes a good manager in general, or a project leader, okay? That's how they have to think. Sometimes we don't want to think like that, and it takes effort. But once you get into that mode, it's pretty amazing how smooth it becomes, and everybody sees it as seamless, okay? It's not a big interruption of life. But that's kind of how I feel in that piece of it, like you're talking about. Scott, you had something you wanted to say?
Well, believe it or not, I wasn't going to talk.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But what I wanted to elaborate on, Mr. Hathorn, I'd like him to come back up here if he would, but he keeps mentioning this air show. That's a 1 day out of 365 days. And for clarification, the difference between an air show and a fly-in, I mean, this is just for your edification. What we did out here for the 80th anniversary, incidentally, only happens once every 10 years. Once every 10 years, we did it in December, and we did it 10 years prior to that. And Ms. Rutowski was there, and I was adamant with these people, no, this is not an air show. An air show is where you close the airspace, and you have aerobatics, you have formation flights, you have all these circus-like features. What we had is a fly-in when airplanes come in and do a static display. It is legal during one of those for the airspace to stay open. And if somebody has a World War II airplane, for instance, they can fly it by the runway, but they're following normal traffic. So I think it would be more appropriate, and I can't tell him what to say, but more on the day-to-day basis, what happens at the airport with routine business is what, if you can share any of that is what I was going to hopefully get. And again, just to address what you're saying, okay, so basically y'all would like to hire the airport manager and just have him report to you. So you said you don't have much expertise in that. How do you go about interviewing somebody when you're not experts? That's just food for thought. You can get anybody in there. And what I always used to say when I was working where I worked, I did a lot of interviews and I hired a lot of people, and some of those people didn't work out too well. But it was my experience, when people are applying and participating in an interview, they are a car salesman at that point. They're going to tell you everything you want to hear. With us, we can see right through that. If we're interviewing, if Mr. Kirkland's interviewing, he has enough aviation knowledge to know whether they're putting on their show, So I don't know if you could do that. And then I'm assuming if you went to this, you say there'd be an advisory committee. Well, again, that's those layers that I think Grant's talking about. So the tenants come to the advisory committee. They have to meet once a month. They have to discuss it. And then the advisory comes back to the council, I would assume, or to the manager. I don't know how that would work. But you're just adding layers of things you already control, other than the hiring of that person. But anyway, my point in coming back up is to ask Mr. Hathorn if he would address the daily stuff. Because one of the things I've seen over there, I fly in there, they're very nice if you can find somebody. I go in this huge FBO. Theirs is, twice the size of our square footage? And I have to walk around the halls sometimes to find an attendant. There's nobody there. I mean, they're there. They might be out in the middle of the field. The one person seems like they're doing it all. Plus, I believe the city is cutting all the grass out there and everything. I don't know if you could elaborate on that further.
I'm not current on what's going on out there. other
Can
than
you,
the
can you
fact-
come up here, please? Just so we can catch you on the microphone. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I've been off the board for a year. They have a new airport manager. I'd say this. There's a lot of good old boy network down there and nepotism. And I don't think that the person who they hired was the best candidate. And I think the activity that's going on down there now is reflective of that. And the people on the airport board and the former city, or the airport manager, didn't have a say on who was hired. And I see a lot of what my concerns are here happening there in real time. And the relationships that people are worried about here are really what is the continuity that has held this airport in good stead and had it progressed, not the opposite of what I'm hearing, the negativity about, you know, where it is and so forth. I think to undo what you have now is a big mistake.
Thank you. I think, for one thing, on the potential hiring of an airport manager, it would never be our intent to get someone that would not be a good fit, and that we would have to arm ourselves with appropriate knowledge and information with feedback from you all on what that candidate should be. I was personally very involved in hiring within my previous organization I worked with on very high-level positions, and I feel like you definitely don't do the right thing if you don't pick the right person, like what you're talking about at the other location. And I'm sure that all of us feel we would want that right person for you and for us. Again, it's a partnership. It's not something we're going to continue to try to do this, to me, under any terms. I just want to clarify that because I think it's important to know that. So we would make every effort in the event, if we decide to do that, that it is the right person, the right fit.
I've been in the aviation business for 55 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the information, I've run businesses, I've owned businesses, all in aviation. That's what I do. I think we have people with similar experience and knowledge in the aviation business on this board. And to have someone who doesn't understand or not, and knowledge, I'm not, you know, talking down, I'm just saying the insights that are involved in what the other person who you're trying to hire, their knowledge and experience can be judged by these people. And we just tried to hire somebody from the FAA who was the airport manager in Denver, Colorado. And he couldn't answer one question about rules, regulations. And finally, you know, he was smart enough to back off, you know, from being the nominee to run the FAA. Not that this is the same thing, but it's gauged that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the input from the people that are on the board should definitely be the experienced people who decide who the next.
That was nationally televised, and it was really embarrassing for that guy and for the whole country.
It surely was.
I know what you're
I was
referring to.
embarrassed for that person. So anyway.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Mr. Brown, Mr. Tony Brown, you have any comments?
We've been here for almost 2 hours. And I didn't bring a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, so we need to move along. So I still would like for us to consider, and it's not that, yes, if it was done in a way of the council hiring a manager I don't see that if we were to change this, we would still possibly have the same people on a committee that we have on the authority. You're still gonna have to have a committee. And that information the manager would bring, just like our manager does, and the mayor and the chairman get with your managers and you do your agendas for the upcoming meeting. And it's run, I see it being ran like that. And, but having to go through red tape and everything, if you have an airport manager, that's the person you need to go to, because that's the person that's running the day-to-day operations of an airport. And it's like, I have people call me and have concerns inside the city limits. Call City Hall and talk to the city manager, because she's the one that's going to handle whatever the problem is. Now, if it needs to be brought up to us, it's brought up to us on the agenda. Same way with if you have a tenant that has a problem, goes to the city or to the manager there at the airport, and then it needs to come before the committee to discuss it. That's how I'm seeing it. If I'm seeing it wrong, somebody needs to tell me.
What committee would they?
You would have a committee. You're not just going to have, I'm not looking at having just a manager out there. I'm looking just to have a manager, and then you have an advisory board, just like the heritage that we've talked about here.
Right, but
when we had a CRA board, now the city council's the CRA, but that board, the CRA, had an agenda. They came, they did their job, and then anything that needed to be approached by the council was approached by the council from that committee.
But the tenant would go to the airport manager, and the manager would come to this council, right?
If he couldn't handle it.
If he couldn't
If he
answer the
couldn't,
question.
well, no. Correct me, guys, if I'm saying this wrong, but my vision is to have, a tenant would come to the manager, and if it's not being resolved, then that tenant has an opportunity to come to the committee.
But that committee's just advisory. It has no authority.
That's not how it works.
Again, no disrespect.
Oh, this is all new.
As a consultant, though, I feel like my responsibility is to advise the airport board, but as an extension, I want the city to be well advised as well. That's not at all how airport advisory committees function. They don't function in the model. What you just described, a very ideal situation where the airport advisory committee would support the airport manager and help move things along. But because they have no authority, they're typically not paid. They don't exist. In fact, they don't usually meet monthly. They meet as needed at most airports. And the example that, I don't work at Palatka, so I don't have any firsthand knowledge, but that example is pretty typical of how things go. It just gets harder for a tenant to get an answer to a question or make a modification to their building where they need some approval. The process gets more complicated for the tenant. And the level of service, again, based on my experience at other airports, the level of service goes from, high average down to average or low average. It typically never degrades to a non-compliant level because there are methods in place to whip airports into shape if they're becoming non-compliant, meaning not following rules, not passing the DOT inspection. It's a whole host of things that can cause an airport to be in non-compliance. But again, not my job to burst your bubble, but in my experience, airport advisory committees don't operate that way. They might in other contexts. I don't have any experience on a CRA or a heritage committee, I think is what you called it. But airport advisory councils don't typically operate that way.
Okay, and, thank you.
Yep.
Another comment is, and the tenants could answer this, is when in the past you've had an issue, do you take it to the manager or do you take it to a board member?
I can answer that.
Okay.
We always take it to the manager, and then it usually goes before the board. It depends on the level of decision. But I would like to, if I could, I'm seeing something from bits and pieces of people that are being said, and maybe I can illustrate it a different way and kind of, basically from what I'm hearing from the different inputs, and this is true, it comes down to who has the decision-making authority and do you have the experience to make that decision. So the concern would be, let's say, and I don't know this is how it's gonna be, I'm just
Go ahead,
gonna
go ahead.
throw it out there. You have an airport manager that reports to the city council, and they say, we wanna have an air show. And me as an operator, I say, I don't wanna have an air show, I wanna have a fly-in. There's a difference, and in any industry, words are important. We don't want FAA involvement. The second you say air show, there's an FAA component that comes into that. Another example would be, and Grant and I were talking about it, is somebody asks all the time, can you guys do a flyby? Absolutely not. I can do an approach with an option, which means I don't need FAA approval. I'm just flying a normal traffic pattern. But those are very technical aspects of it, sort of. But it kind of gets to the larger question of who's actually making the decision. And right now you have an authority board that has the experience to make decisions based on what regulations are and have that depth of knowledge. And I think that, not that you don't, and not that you couldn't learn it. I mean, anybody can learn anything. You know, I went from being an infantryman to a program manager. But you can, the question is, does the body that's actually making the decision, are they going to have the knowledge base to make an informed, safe decision? I think that's kind of what we've been saying. It's a lot to deal with.
And
On top of everything else that you've been doing.
bootstrapping on that, if we don't have the knowledge and we don't make ourselves knowledgeable and we make a bad decision and somebody gets hurt,
Yes,
that
sir.
could be gross negligence, and that could flow to the individual council people and to the city.
Yes, sir.
That's my concern.
Active racetrack on that property as well. Correct. And the liability that comes along with that,
Yeah, it could get real messy.
very quick.
Mr. Bobby Brown, do you have anything else to add?
I'm still dragging a lot of this stuff in. I think we all need a big pat on the back, and we need to turn around and have somebody kick us in the butt at the same time. We're sitting here with the best thing in the world, both sides of everything, and I feel like we're kind of arguing over details. Who's going to get the tip at the end of the best meal you ever had?
Well, that's where our rulemaking power comes in. We can make reasonable rules by ordinance. If there's something going on out there that makes us uncomfortable, we can deal with it on a case-by-case basis.
That's true. But I still believe that I don't need to walk into a room and the wings flare up on like a bunch of little guinea hornets and wasps that I'm afraid to say anything. And I'm not. I'm not a good speaker, but you're going to eventually hear what I have to say. But we have really got the best of both worlds here in Keystone, and the decision is so important that we make the right decision, because you don't want to screw it up, and we can't afford to screw it up. That's all I got to say.
Councilwoman Chris?
I move to make the airport a department under the city of Keystone.
This is a workshop. Do we take a vote?
As a publicly noticed meeting, traditionally, there's not votes, but there's nothing that precludes it.
That's the way I feel.
Do I have a
discussion?
second? Oh, go ahead.
Can we discuss before we do a second or anything like that?
There's a second for the point of discussion.
Okay, I'll make a second for discussion so that I can discuss.
I'm getting lost here.
Well, I'm trying to find my compass. I hope that you guys don't fault us for questioning. It's our job. I think everything should have any kind of business model or anything you have needs to be looked at every so often. I feel like, personally, I feel that looking at this has opened a lot in the past 2 hours, answered a lot of questions, and like I said before, shame on me for not knowing some of these because I've been here for 20-plus years. And we've had a lot of good boards out there. We've had a lot of, not a lot, but we've had issues in the past with boards, and they were taken care of, and they were taken care of at this dais. So I'm sorry, but I'm not, I think I have a lot of unanswered questions that before I make a yay or nay, I want to know, because I mean, I thought I had it all together, but I don't. I'm sorry. And whoever's out there watching us, you know, this is a major, major undertaking. And I honestly came in here ready to say with the manager, and one side of me is saying, yes, we need to have a manager. We need to have that manager answer to this council. But I've sat here, like I said, for 2 hours, and I listened to a lot. Vice Mayor, I appreciate your law background, like always. Some of it scares me, but they,
meant to.
but I'm not prepared to make a decision today, and I think that I have a lot of unanswered questions. And if we need to put this on the agenda for the next meeting or have another workshop, so be it. But I can't say right now I can do that. And I appreciate you, Chris. I really do, for standing up. But this is a very big opportunity, or not opportunity, a big taking over that I, as a councilman, and that represents the people inside this city, I need to really do some soul searching myself.
Tony, can I bootstrap on that just a bit? Just like the new football team, the coach says this is a football. We have to go back to the basics here and remember who we work for, and we work for the people in the city. And as council pointed out earlier, if we had a staggering money judgment and the people in the city all of a sudden got stuck with increased real estate taxes, or if we got stuck with liability ourselves, we're not doing our job. And I think our job basically is to look out for the city. And from my analysis, from a legal standpoint and sovereign immunity, I think we'd be really stepping into it if we voted that motion, which has not been seconded yet, as a yay. I just think we wouldn't be doing our job. And I think if taxpayers all of a sudden got stuck with a big contract bill or something, you better get a grease pole and some feathers, because it'd be coming after us. So that's my viewpoint.
Just for clarification, it had been seconded.
What has been seconded?
I said
Oh, that's
that
right.
discussion.
I'm sorry.
I didn't hear what he said. What did?
He's just saying that it was seconded so we could discuss it.
So we can discuss it, yeah. For me personally, I really do side with what Councilmember Brown has stated here, Tony. I feel that we, as a group, needs to become more knowledgeable of your processes. Obviously, we are not. And my goodness, we've learned so much today, me especially, and I feel we owe it to you and to the city to become knowledgeable, more knowledgeable. And I'm not saying we're going to become the experts on any terms, okay? But we have to have presence. And I think it starts with attending your meetings, and I know some have, but it's not been a consistent situation. And maybe I think once we get some involvement with that and we do that and we talk more about things, maybe that'll assure folks of, well, really things are okay, we maybe don't need to do this, okay? Just like Steve's talking about the liability piece. Like Tony said, it's kind of on the fence, kind of does, but kind of doesn't. Maybe it comes under a title as a liaison. I mean, I know my organization had a liaison between us and a major distributor. because sometimes things get a little complicated. And that person is just kind of that peacemaker person, that person, that communicator, that's kind of floating around and ensuring that everybody has what they need, okay? So I don't know, I really feel like maybe a temporary solution is to, us again, have more presence at your meetings, more involvement, and, then make some decisions on how we feel about that concept of an airport manager under the city.
Question of council, would the mayor have the authority to appoint a liaison without any further ado? No? Okay. So we would have to take it up as a council.
I mean, yes, because you're using the word council twice. The city council, yes, I think would have to make that decision.
Oh, to appoint a liaison? Okay. Well, I mean, clearly that liaison would be someone that would be extremely knowledgeable in your world. We can teach them our world, but we can't teach them your world. And I think on the interviewing process, both parties have to be involved in that interview. It's important. Because, again, you're working with that individual. And I know it's a little different than what we elected with your board, but in that position, I think it's important that you all would both be involved in that selection.
Can I comment on that, please?
Yes.
Once you get involved in the day-to-day operation, which I think would include the hiring of a manager, even if it's just to have input, I think you're opening up a door that you wouldn't want to open up as far as liability walking through that door if you had a creative judge who for some reason wanted to find the city liable because the city had a deep pocket. So I think your best bet is you can make recommendations, you can have, but don't get involved in the actual process. That would be my view of the world. But we can still have input, but they have to make the decision.
Right,
Okay.
right. That's what I mean.
Just want to clarify that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, currently, like, we elected the board, and y'all didn't have input, which was a big issue. I think it has to be, that person has to be looked at equally between us. You have that right, I think, to have weigh in on that. It's just my opinion. I mean, it's just like we had hiring managers, but yeah, we have HR that selects an employee. That hiring manager had input, and we could all explore the pluses and minuses and come together with a solution. Well, what is the plan?
I call for a vote, I guess. That we got a motion, we got a second.
Move to table to the next meeting?
Hold on, we've got a motion already on the floor.
We do, and I'm making a motion which takes precedent to table.
You make a motion, what?
To table the issue.
To table the issue?
Mm-hmm. So we need a second for my motion to table.
All right, hold on a minute. We got a motion and a second. Do we not have to vote on that motion? If it dies, then we do Vice Mayor's motion?
The Vice Mayor's motion is to table Councilwoman Thompson's motion.
Right.
You made a motion to.
Okay, I got you.
You made-
Second.
Yeah,
Second.
and under Robert's rules, there are precedents of motions, and a motion to table would take precedence over the main motion. So I'm making a motion to table, not to kill it, just to table it. With a second and a vote to table, that just means it could come up at a later meeting when we have a chance to think about this. I call the question.
Now vote is on the motion to table.
Okay.
Voters on the motion to table.
Do we have a period of time to table, or do we have to set one?
You can,
That's up to me?
I mean, it's up to you as a council.
the way it would work is you would make a motion at a next meeting or whatever meeting to take it off the table. Once it comes off the table, then it's live and you can go with it. You're not killing it. You're just postponing the decision-making process. That's all, to think about this a little bit.
Robert's rules doesn't contemplate sunshine though, so at some point,
It's got to be broken.
if the motion to table prevails, then you just have to put it on an agenda.
Right, and we'll take it off the table. So anyway, the motion has been made to table, there's been a second, and I guess the next step would be to call the question.
Vote.
So we vote.
So we vote,
Mhm.
okay? So, Mr. Tony Brown, your vote? I mean, well, we all need to
We
vote,
just-
right?
We can just vote as
All
a
in
group.
favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 No.
Motion carried.
That's it?
I've got one quick question.
Yes,
We're
sir.
not adjourned. Would I be allowed to talk to some of their board and stuff like that? Wouldn't mess with the sunshine law? I just wanted to,
Sunshine applies in between the 5 of you, and sunshine applies between the 7 of them. I mean, there's really only 6 now, but in theory, there's 7 of them.
okay. That's it.
Yes, yes, sir.
I had early on in my comment asked Mr. Brown, Councilman Brown, about the previous city manager. And I assume that's Mr. Suggs?
Yes, when he brought it up.
Okay,
And that was when he, I believe, when he first came on board as the manager.
okay.
He looked at it.
And where's he,
I don't know why he dropped it. I don't have a clue.
and where's he the city manager now?
He's not, he's a county manager.
County manager,
But,
Putnam County, Platica.
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.